All right, so then we move on to the section Antithesis between Christian and non-Christian religion. So this antithesis is pretty well covered in Van Tillian Apologetics, and so I believe Bahnsen carries that through, especially in the book of Bahnsen that we did. The second book, I believe, is the Antithesis book to talk about. Well, the exclusive truth claims of Christianity are widely rejected today in favor of religious pluralism. The belief that the different religions of the world are all valid paths, and none of them is to be regarded as true to the exclusion of the other. The classical apologists argue that this view is false because different world religions are logically incompatible. They're not possible to hold both Hinduism and Christianity. One's mono, one's poly. It's not able to hold Islam and Mormonism up because those two are polytheistic and then monotheistic, like Unitarian monotheistic. Evidentialists argue it's false because non-Christian religions are not supported by the fact of history and science, while Christianity enjoys strong factual support.
Right. So for the classicalists, then, other religions are incompatible, logically incompatible with Christianity. Mm-hmm. And for the evidentialists, then, the facts of history with regard to the other religions are not as strong with regard to their factual support, right? So those are the other two major positions.
Which we have covered in the past too. So those were the two we covered so far.
Right. Okay, what about the Reformed approach? Well, Reformed apologetics characteristically find both of these approaches, as we might expect, inadequate, right? So a typical Van Tillian critique would run along the line something like this. The classical approach assumes that Christians and non-Christians share the same understanding of what is logically possible. And the evidentialist approach assumes that they share the same understanding of what kinds of facts are even possible, as well as what kinds are religiously significant. And of course, Reformed apologetics favors a more head-on approach, which they summarize, our book wants us to summarize in two particular points, right? So Van Til, rejects both of these kind of approaches with regard to the how we deal with non-Christian religions.
Yeah. And I don't know whether to say this now or at the end, is that anyone who holds to this theory isn't going to reject the use of history or logic. We're saying that in order to get to those answers, we need to have a more basic conversation and taking a step back. But if your friends are saying, did Jesus really exist? Well, it's not outside the realm of possibility to just say yes. Let's look at these three non-Christian sources. Let's look at the wide use of Scripture as defined in the early first century. But if we're going to have a full conversation, then more than just on the bus, then we want to start back and say, well, okay, how do we hold things like science as being true or history is able to be relied upon. So I'll throw that in first before we cover it, just to say presuppositionalist apologists don't go, science, history. Yeah. No one can learn anything from those.
That's right.
No, especially from the Reformed perspective of wanting to go back to the basics. All right, well, first, Reformed apologetics characteristic of it to contend that religious pluralism is self-defeating. Okay, it's not comparing and contrasting. It's saying, listen, religious pluralism on the whole is self-defeating. Any criticism of religious exclusivism actually presupposes its truth. In practice, classical and evidential apologists can and sometimes do make the same point. So this isn't just wholly a thing, but to say, there can be more than one religious truth. Well, guess what? That's religious exclusivism. You're saying it is possible. So therefore, you're just now taking a step back and making a initial starting point for all of the religions then to follow. And right. Not only would Hinduism not do it, but Christianity shouldn't do it. Islam isn't going to do it. So this type of pronouncement upon all religious people is your kind of monotheistic starting point here. Well, then second, at the bottom, there really are only two kinds of religion. The one that makes God ultimate, like Christianity, and the one that do not at all, like all other religions.
Right. And so notice here then, so the first kind of criticism of other religions is with regard to exclusivism, is that, they are exclusive, right? And they're self-defeating. And so that's the first issue. And the second one is this issue of the two kinds of, there are only two kinds of religion, right? Now we say, wait a minute, there are all kinds of religions. No, there's basically two kinds, right? Either Christianity and then everything else. So that's the basic approach, right?
And I believe Frame talked about that in the book that we went over with him. He kind of wanted to distill things down into those kind of two approaches as well.
Right. So exclusivism, as used here, then refers to the claim that only the Christian religion is true. That's the notion of exclusivism. Mm-hmm. So in a narrower sense, then the term also refers to the claim that only the Christian religion is salvific, right? That is, that only those who believe in Christ will be saved. So that's the basic idea here. Now, what about Plantinga? Well, Plantinga identifies two basic kinds of objections to exclusivism, and he calls them the moral objection and the epistemic objection. And Plantinga has a nice, nice paper on this particular issue with regard to exclusivism. He says that the moral objections complain that exclusivism is arrogant and imperialistic and oppressive, and the like, while the epistemic objections characterize it as irrational or unjustified, right? So those are kind of the two objections that Plantinga suggests with regard to exclusivism. Now, Plantinga observes that these objections do not purport to question the truth of the basic Christian beliefs. They are just, directed to the propriety or maybe the rightness of exclusivism. So they're not looking at whether or not the Christian religion is true. They're just suggesting, well, exclusivism isn't good, right? Kind of thing, right?
It's like today when we talk about we have strength in our diversity, or we have colonialism is bad. Well, I mean, those are claims, and you can say like, oh, that was colonialistic. Like, well, okay, but was it good? Was it bad? Diversity is our strength. If you have somebody in your organization that's against your organization, they're very diverse from you. Do you want them? And so we have to talk more than just platitudes and saying, this is a thing and I don't like it.
Right.
Plantinga's answer to the charge that exclusivists, thus defined, must be arrogant is to show that the accusation would have to apply equally to the critic of exclusivism.
Yeah.
These changes of arrogance are a philosophical tar baby. Get close enough to them to use them against exclusivists, and you are likely to find them stuck fast to yourself. I always think of Saving Private Ryan, the sticky bombs that they used. And it's like, well, you got to make sure that they're sticky enough to get on the tank, but not so sticky to stay on you. Plantinga considers several forms of epistemic objections to exclusivism. The charge that exclusivism is unjustified really turns on whether its beliefs are true, since if they are, it follows quite simply that denial of them are false.
Right.
Easy enough.
Right. And so this is the two approaches then that Plantinga uses with regard to the charge about the moral and epistemic issues of exclusivism. First, hey, if you're going to start lobbing those bombs, right, you make sure they don't stick to you, which indeed they would. And then secondly, let's look at what the claims are before we start criticizing exclusivism in and of itself, right? So that's what he's getting at here. All right, so then they move to Plantinga's handling of what they call the popular accident of birth argument with regard to exclusivism, and they think that it's particularly interesting. So according to this argument, the exclusivist is unwarranted in thinking that his religious beliefs are true and alternative beliefs are false, because most people's religious belief, including the exclusivists, are a function of where they were born and who their parents are, right? So you believe what you believe based on where you were born and who your parents are, your culture, your society, your religious milieu, that kind of stuff, right? Well, Plantinga responds that this argument, he says, is another philosophical tar baby that will apply equally to the pluralists, right? In other words, if you start saying that about me and my exclusivism, well, I can say the reason why you believe what you believe is because of where you were born. And so, what have we accomplished, right, with regard to this? Yeah. This reminds me of the three elephants, the guys who said, well, they were blind men and the three elephants. And the point of that illustration, right? One said, an elephant is like a tree because he's only touching the leg, or he's like a rope because he's only touching the tail. But really, they're not seeing the whole elephant. Mm-hmm. Well, the problem with that illustration is the person who is claiming that they're not seeing the whole elephant also has a perspective. Right. And so what about your perspective? What if it's more than just an elephant? Right. Now you're not right either. So once you start casting that kind of criticism, make sure it doesn't bounce back on you. Right, is the idea.
Right. So from what position overhead can you see the whole elephant to tell other people? Well, there's this elephant, right? Oh, you mean the rope thing? No. We know what an elephant is. Oh, do we? Because I'm only supposed to see one.
Yeah. So just like they're assuming they know what they're experiencing, you're also assuming that you know what you're experiencing. In this case, a whole elephant.
Right? Which then reminds me of Nancy Pearcey's book when we talked about I think it was her third point of her 5 points. And I always term it as the octopus that you're trying to fit in the box, and then there's things that fall outside the box, the tentacle. And so you're just saying, well, I'm super spiritual than more super spiritual than you, so I'm able to see the whole elephant, or I'm more enlightened than you plebs that are touching the side of the elephant, and so you have to make a special case for you, which is might be a little bit harder for you to do. And here, is there someone who possibly could see the whole elephant? Maybe the person who created the elephant and then told us what the elephant is? I mean, maybe something there. Yeah. All right, well, Van Til also considers the accident of birth argument in his apologetic track, Why I Believe in God. He contends that such an argument results in a stalemate and cannot then be used to determine what is true. He contrasts his upbringing in a devout Calvinist home with an imagined upbringing of his fictional non-Christian listener in a pluralistic home. He says, you are as thoroughly conditioned not to believe in God as I was to believe in God. Let us not call each other names. If you want to say that belief was poured down my throat, I shall retort by saying that unbelief was poured down your throat. Having showed that neutrality on religious questions is not an option, conservative Reformed apologists such as Van Til and Clark go on to show that Christianity must be regarded as the true religion.
Right. So Van Til, and actually he wrote, I think, anyway, this is similar to what Plantinga has done, right? It's the tar baby type of thing, right? If you're going to claim that for me, I can make the same claim for you. So where has it gotten us, right? Okay, we've called each other names. Now let's move on from there and see if we can, understand where we're coming from. Yeah.
We're still on that phase a lot of times in the modern world, so we're still calling each other names.
All right, so apologists following Van Til's method insist on what they see as an even more radical response to the challenge of other religions, both theistic and non-theistic. Bonson sets up the parameters something like this. He says, in dealing with the advocates of other religions, the Christian apologist should use the presuppositional method in the same way that we would use it with atheists and materialists. Right? That is, he makes an internal examination of the worldview that is offered by whatever religious devotee that he's having his dialogue with, right? So we do the same thing. We treat it the same thing as we do if we're talking with atheists and materialists. He says the fact that the opposing religionist speaks formally of God or gods is not a difficulty. He says, because the person must define his specific concept of deity. And so the use of religious vocabulary, when I'm talking about God, does not change the applicability of the indirect method of disproving non-Christian presuppositions. So Bahnsen says, hey, look, we can use the same methodology as we do for the atheists with regard to other religions. We do an internal critique of their particular worldview, in this instance, their religious worldview, and we show the issues and the problems there.
Right. Well, in sum, the Reformed Apologist answers the challenge of religious pluralism in two ways. First, they explain that there is nothing arrogant or unreasonable about believing that one's religious beliefs are true, right? Why hold to them if you don't believe that they're true?
Yeah.
Therefore, the other beliefs have to be false. Indeed, it is unreasonable to say anything else. Again, Christians believe Christian things, and, extra, read all about it.
Go figure, right? Yeah.
Right. Second, particularly conservative, such as Clark and Van Til, argue that only Christian theism presents a worldview or transcendent point of reference in terms of which knowledge and ethics are possible or intelligible. On this basis, they conclude that non-Christian religions, though there is much good in them, are basically false.
Right. So that's the idea with regard to other religions, right? That's one of the positions now that we're working our way through with this particular chapter.